Welcome to Independent Lifestyles, a program of the Sheboygan County Aging and Disability Resource Center. I'm Lisa Hurley, Caregiver Coordinator for the Aging and Disability Resource Center. Today I welcome Dorothy McElroy, and she is with Final Life Journey Doula. Welcome, Dorothy.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So I'm sure as we introduce you, people will be wondering, so what is an end-of-life doula? Let's start out with the question everyone viewing would like to know.
Yes, and that is the biggest question we always get. Everyone has heard of birth doulas.
Exactly.
But they've never heard of an end-of-life doula. And they've actually been around for quite a while. An end-of-life doula is somebody who is professionally trained. They come in and they help the person who is dying before, during, and after a death. We also help their loved ones learn how the whole process is going with death. So we don't want people to be afraid of it. We don't want people to be intimidated by what they're going through. You know, studies show that 80% of people want to die at home. And in reality, it's only 20% that actually do die at home. And we are there to help. We're not medically trained. You know, we support holistically, we support psychosocially, emotionally, spiritually. We help the whole family and not just that dying person. And we walk with you through the whole process. So right from the first diagnosis until the end. So we work with hospice, we work with medical professionals, we can even work with palliative care.
Wow, to really help people through that journey. And let me ask you, what made you choose this path to be an end-of-life doula? How did that begin for you?
Unfortunately, I'm not a stranger to death. My mom, when she died, I was only 18, and that was really my first major experience with death. And it wasn't something that I was really comfortable or happy with, obviously. And then her mother, my grandmother, passed away a few years after that. And then my sister and then my husband passed away 6.5 years ago, and our son was 7. And I knew, based on my experience with my own mom's death, I knew I wanted my sons to be different. I wanted him, it sounds weird, but I wanted him to be able to experience a good death with his dad. And I wanted his dad to experience a good death. And where my husband passed away, they did it in such a unique way. There were no end-of-life doulas there. It's just now coming. I believe there's about 6 of us in the state of Wisconsin right now. But there were no doulas there to help us guide our way. So we had child psychologists, we had psychiatrists there, and they really took the time and they let my son be in control of the death, which was, to me, it was amazing. Because I'm like, wait, I've never seen this before. How do they do this? So that's really what started it. I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to help other children and other family members experience the slowness of how my son was able to do with his dad. You know, he was able to lay down with him, he was able to talk to him, even though my husband was, he was unconscious. But people can still hear you. You know, there's still a little bit of brain activity. They can still hear you. You really, really need to talk to that person. And that's, I think, the biggest misconception is people are, I never got a chance to say this. I never got a chance to experience this. Well, you can still do that. They can still hear you.
Do you think it helps then in the grieving process after the person has passed?
Absolutely. I really do. Besides getting the doula, I'm also a grief support specialist. So I've gotten that, which helps greatly with what we're doing. And you don't want, as much as you try, you don't want to have any regrets, either when you're dying or missing that opportunity with a person who's close to you who has died. There's a movie called I Never Sang for My Father, And I love the beginning and ending of this film.
Oh, I'll have to look
The
that up.
same word, the same phrase is said, death ends a life. It does not end a relationship, which struggles on in the survivor's mind towards some resolution it'll never find, which is so true. You know, we're more afraid for the person who's dying than the person who's actually dying. And we need to have that, there's a conversation built in there, and we need to have that conversation about death that we're so afraid of having.
And do you think that's part of our culture here? I don't know if it's an American culture, a Midwest culture, that there is that fear of talking about it, an embarrassment, a stigma, that type of thing, and that needs to be overcome?
I think it is a stigma. It is. Americans, I guess we as a society, we as a culture, don't embrace death because many are just too afraid of it. It's that reality that we're all too afraid to grasp, and everyone's going to die. It's a concept
Of when,
that maybe,
exactly, right?
Maybe we'll live forever. Wouldn't that be great? But we can't. You know, there's no way we can do that. And that's why there's this huge movement. It's called a death movement right now, where people are having death cafes, or they're having death over dinner conversations, and it's really just about getting together and talking about death. It's not a counseling session. It's not a grief therapy. It's just people getting together, caregivers, or someone who's lost a loved one, or somebody who is struggling with the fact, I don't want to die. What do I do? How do I handle this? And you get together in a non-threatening setting. You can have drinks. You can have food. You can just sit down and have coffee, whatever is easiest and whatever's most comfortable. And you just talk about your fears or your concerns. And it's a fantastic way to get that conversation started. Randy Pausch, in his book, The Last Lecture, and the last lecture that he gave at the university when he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he knew he was going to die, and this was the last lecture he was going to give at college, he said, if there's an elephant in the room, go introduce yourself. And I love that, because death is that elephant in the room. Everyone wants to avoid it. They don't want to see it. They want to hide. And we can't. There's no way we can.
It's a reality.
It is a reality.
Have you been noticing, too, that people's end-of-life decisions, or maybe I'm talking more funerals, they talk about celebrations of life, is that changing from the typical, possibly, everything happening at a funeral home or a church, or what are people doing that's different than what it used to be?
There's a lot of people now who are opting for green funerals. And green funerals are, you do not use a funeral home. You do not get embalmed. You strictly lay yourself out the way that we came into the earth. You lay yourself back into the earth. So the green burial option, there's actually 7 green burial cemeteries in the state of Wisconsin right now, and they're building more. And then there's funeral home guides that can help the family go in and prepare the person's body. You do not have to, it's not a state law, you do not have to be embalmed. You do not have to have an undertaker or a funeral home pick up the deceased body from the hospital. You know, so let's say a relative of mine passed away at a hospital, and I said, well, we're going to have a home funeral, and we'd rather not have the funeral home, you know, pick up Aunt Susie. So I'm going to do it. And I can do that. In Wisconsin, you can legally go. You can go pick up the body. You can have dry ice at home. You can preserve the body at home. You can have family, friends, and you can have your own wake in your own house. They
Which
can help.
years ago they used to do that.
Yes, that's what they used to do. That's
and I'm
what they
sure you
used to
know
do.
a little bit about the history of death, or how death was treated, correct?
Right. And death was, I mean, the concept isn't new. You're really actually reintroducing it back into society where it's not taboo, trying to take that tabooism away. Embalming really didn't come famous until Lincoln died, and they put Lincoln on the train, and with all the people who died in the Civil War, they had to figure out, okay, how do we ship the bodies back without smelling or deteriorating?
Right.
And then when embalming, so then when embalming came in with President Lincoln, and I think that was a 6-week trip that they were able to preserve his body.
Okay.
That's when it really became popular, and here we go. But nowadays there is that movement for green burial. And
Well, that's interesting.
It is interesting. People can prepare the body themselves. They can buy a regular pine casket. They can decorate the casket, which is really therapeutic for kids and for adults alike. What better way to send off somebody you love by, decorating things that they loved? This is type of a legacy that they can leave behind as well.
And I'm assuming that with the end-of-life doula end of thing, where you are working with the family, because I'm sure you come across a lot of situations where there's a lot of family dynamics involved, and your hope would be that you could maybe help talk through that, kind of flesh that out, and bring it back to the person that is going through the dying process and what's best for that person. Is that how you do it? Or how do you work with families to really help them understand the process and what's best for their loved one?
You really do. You do need to walk with them, walk with the family members, as well as when you're with the client, the patient. We're not medical, so client. And when you're with the client, you're holding space. And when you're holding space with somebody, and you may know, you're being very quiet, and you're just there for them, and you're soaking up what they're experiencing, and you're there for support and strength. And you're there for support and strength for the family members as well. And you're explaining to them the process of the active stages of when somebody is dying. So I don't know if you've ever sat with somebody who has passed away. Actually,
in 2017, in January of 17, my mother passed on hospice in her own bed at home.
Okay.
And 90 days to the minute, my dad passed in the same bed at home. So our family says, my mother said, Glenn, your 90-day probation period's up. You're coming with me. And I have to say that it was a very peaceful experience in both situations that I never anticipated.
It is very, and there's a spiritual aspect to it as well. For many families, that's what it is. But my job, part of my job as a doula, is to help prepare the families for, okay, they are going to be struggling for breath sometimes. There is going to be a gurgling sound sometimes. And a person's first instinct is to say, wait a minute, we need to call somebody, something needs to be cleared out, we have to save them. But that's not what you do, especially if, and this is where we help them too, do you have a will? Do you have advance directives? Do you have everything set up? Do you know who, if you have pets, do you know who's going to take your pets? And you have grandchildren. Do you know what you want to leave behind for them as the legacy for them? How do we want to help them be prepared? A lot of times we support the family by talking about and answering the questions that they don't have anywhere else to go to talk to. I know when my husband died, I didn't know how to do anything. I mean, I didn't know how to file for Social Security. I didn't know anything about, is there life insurance? How do I find out if there's, he didn't have life insurance,
well,
but
and it's some
we
of those,
help with that.
Exactly. It's some of those situations where if you haven't been through it and you've heard about certain things, it's kind of like you don't know what you don't know. So
Exactly.
Where do you even begin?
Right.
And especially at such a stressful, overwhelming time,
Right.
to have somebody be able to kind of point you in the right direction of
Right.
where you're supposed to go next.
Right, and that's what we try to do. We really try to help everybody involved to make this as smooth as transition as possible. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be morbid. It doesn't have to be sad. It doesn't have to be so devastating that my life's never going to be, obviously your life's never going to be the same without that person being there. Mm-hmm. But just because they're not there physically, they're always going to be there with you mentally and in some people, spiritually. It's just, there's things you can do.
Oh, I believe in signs.
That. Exactly. There are signs out there.
I've had a lot of pennies from heaven in the past couple of years, so.
And that's great. And as a movement, doulas really want to change the way that death is seen. We want to, obviously it's not going to be happy and cheerful, but we want to take that stigmatism away, saying, my life is over because that person mm-hmm. died. No, your life isn't over. Their life is over, but you're living, and they want you to have a job while they're gone. You need to carry on that job. What can we do to make an impact and help that?
And find out what some of those wishes would be, how that should be carried out, and not afraid to ask.
Right.
So if you have a client that maybe has recently started hospice services, mm-hmm. how would an end-of-life doula then get involved, and what would that process look like?
And hospice is fantastic. I love working with hospice. And palliative care is involved in there as well. That there's so many regulations that they have to attain to. Mm-hmm. They're governed by what the law says you can or can't do. A doula can come in and stay with that person 24 hours a day if that's what they require. They are, and the next question someone's going to ask is, well, how do you get paid? It is private, so the family does pay you, and it's actually, it's a situation where you can design your own plan.
Okay.
Per person. So if somebody called me...
Custom fit.
Exactly. So if hospice has volunteers coming in from, let's say, 8 in the morning until 8 at night, and they can't find anybody else, then they can call that.
And sometimes it's difficult for them to find volunteers to have that coverage.
Right.
They're willing to say, here's what we can fit, here's what the family can do, but a lot of times you have gaps.
Right. So that's where the doula will come in and stay with that person. And we don't, and I know hospice has NOTA, No One Dies Alone volunteers, and everyone is different. They're trained somewhat the same, but everyone's personalities are different when they're with that, everybody, mm-hmm. each individual case. A doula will come in, and we can do hand massages, we can do foot massages, we can do, if you're trained, I have a certification in mindfulness and music therapy and spirituality and health. So there's different things that we can bring to the table that volunteers can't, because I guess we're not regulated. We're not regulated to the point where you can only have this, you can only have that.
So it gives you that flexibility, as we said, to kind of custom.
It does.
So maybe the person was into a certain type of music.
Right.
Maybe even talking back on what they enjoyed, if they were animals, that type of thing, correct?
Right. And I always spend time with the family and the person first and say, what do you love to do? What can't you do anymore that you absolutely love to do? How can we bring that back to you now? What can we do to bring that piece back so that your puzzle is full when your time is up? Are there anything that you wanted to say to somebody that you can't find that person? Is there anything you ever want to do with your grandkids that you haven't done yet? We try to bring that together so that there's no regrets.
And sometimes it might take someone like a doula, someone that's in a, more from the outside looking in, to ask those questions.
Right.
I bet you find sometimes families too close, or they might feel a little bit of barrier with family, but it's easier to communicate that to someone that's helping them through the process like yourself.
It is. Death is really hard to talk about. You know, nobody wants to talk about it because it's frightening. It can be frightening. But our job is to come in and say, okay, we need to have this conversation. I don't remember the author's name. There's a book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And the biggest regret is I spent too much time working. I didn't spend enough time with my family. I should have done this instead of worried about this or that. And a lot of family members are like that too. Why didn't I say this? Why didn't I? Well, go do it now. You know?
There's still an opportunity.
There. Even though they cannot respond to you, they hear you. Mm-hmm. You can still do that. Don't be afraid of it.
So explain to me, what would a good death look like?
A good death is actually experiencing and living an exceptionally good life. Because so many of us, we work so hard to obtain a living that we sometimes forget to live while we're doing that. There has to be a medium. There has to be a balance. I'd say a good death is what I was able to help my son do when his dad died, 7 years old. How do you explain this? How do you do this? How do you say, you're never going to see him again? What do we do? But he was able to get his handprint. He was able to talk to Dad. He was able to whisper secrets and take a nap. And my husband had achieved a lot of things that he wanted to achieve in his life. He didn't really have a lot of regrets because he lived a life of, okay, I want to do this, so I'm going to do it now.
So kind of like the whole bucket list concept to some degree, or is that?
Kind of, sort of. I don't know if I like the whole bucket list concept.
No.
I'm more of a person that if you want somebody to know that you love them, say it.
Say it.
Why do you want to wait for a special, why do we have Valentine's Day, or why do we have Mother's Day, or why do we have Father's Day? You should tell people you love them every day. If you love them, tell them that. Why do we have to celebrate Mom and Dad on one day? You should be celebrating them every day. They're
exactly.
there. So really, a good death is all about living a good life and being present now. You want to be here now. It's not about, we have to work to survive.
And that all kind of plays into the whole mindfulness end of things, sort of appreciating that moment, remaining more calm, not letting the worry and the anxiety overcome what's happening. So I think having a doula an end-of-life doula helping you through that is going to alleviate some of that as well.
We do. We try to tell people, this is what you need to do. This is, if there's something you ever wanted to do or say, now's the time to do it. What are your most favorite moments about your loved one? What's the funniest thing that ever happened? You can still relive that right now. You don't have to be afraid to do this. There's been situations where I've been with somebody who has just broken down and cried, and all they needed was somebody to hold them and say, it's going to be okay. You're going to be able to survive. They're like, I'm supposed to be strong right now. I can't do this. I can't break down right now. And I'm like,
why not?
You are being strong because you're here. There's a lot of family members who want to say goodbye right at the very beginning and they know their limitations. I can't be here. I can't watch you do this. I just can't do it. And that's okay. But you have to break down. Crying is a huge emotional outlet that allows you to smile later. Mm-hmm. You can't be afraid to talk about death. You can't be afraid to talk about actually anything that scares you. Don't.
And sometimes we hear family members that'll say, I don't know if I can be there because I don't want to remember them in a bed dying as opposed to being alive and full of life.
Right.
And at that point, I think, I hope that person doesn't regret not doing that last visit and seeing beyond the physicalness of it, but more on the emotional end of it.
Right, and we do I try to talk to members and say, you know, this isn't a dress rehearsal. You have one shot at this.
That's a good way to put it.
And you have to, do you want to gradually get up to this point? Would you like to look through a door? Do you want to just sit down with me outside the door? Do you want to, you know, look at and try to get closer and closer to that point so that there are no regrets? I mean, how can we not live a life and have some sort of regret when we didn't do this or that? But it's hard. You know, death is hard. Life is even harder, though.
True.
But death is hard, too.
So tell me a little bit about the end-of-life doula certification. How did that come about, and how does one go about doing that?
I went through Doula Givers out of New York, and there are several colleges now that have the certification. University of Virginia, I think, now has a certification. There is NELDA, which is a National End-of-Life Doula Association. You can go online and look them up, and they will give you programs and things you can get into. And then there is the National Hospice, it's NHOLP, I believe, but the National Hospice is now starting to work with Doula, the NELDA, International and National. But if you go online to the National Association of End-of-Life Doulas, there's a list of different accredited colleges you can go to. Okay. And now there's a NEDA, which is National End-of-Life Doula Association, has a proficiency badge that you need to be certified before you're allowed to take this. And it's one step higher of your level training to be able to offer the best and capabilities that you possibly can with doulas. And then if anybody has any questions, my website is, they can get a hold of me at Life Final Journey Doula at gmail.com.
Okay.
Final Life Journey Doula. I still get it mixed up.
Yeah.
Final Life Journey Doula at gmail.com.
And a phone number that they could reach you?
They can reach me at 262-325-5446.
Great. And if they Google you, there's information out there as well?
If you Google, I just got my Facebook page up and running.
Oh, great.
So Facebook is Final Life Journey Doula.
Wonderful.
As well.
Well, thank you so much, Dorothy.
Thank you.
For joining us here on Independent Lifestyles, a program of the ADRC of Sheboygan County. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You're welcome.